In our modern world, space is valuable. You would know this if you had any concept of it. But it's always been this way throughout human history. The more land you have, the more expensive it is, so building up is often the best option. Sometimes this achievement of humanity just happens out of necessity for space. Sometimes, most of the time, it's to build a new structure bigger and grander than that of any before. Over the past 2,000 years, as society has evolved, structures have evolved around with it, gradually increasing in height. This is from improved methods of construction, understanding of mathematics and geometry, and putting literally centuries into some works. What buildings once reigned supreme for decades or centuries? Well, that's what this video is about. In 2560 BC, the most impressive architectural endeavor of mankind had finally came to a close. After 2 decades of work, the Great Pyramid of Giza was finally finished, created to be the crypt of Pharaoh Khufu. This magnificent structure was originally covered in pure white limestone. What we see today is just the base. In its glory days, the pyramid reached a height of 481 feet. It was to be a lasting impact of Egypt's greatness, and it certainly did last. The Great Pyramid was the tallest human structure on Earth for almost 4,000 years. The spacing between each block is about 1/50th of an inch, which is quite impressive considering the structure contains over 2 million of them. Some of the stones were granite and could weigh up to 80 tons. Some even coming from over 500 miles away. While it is true that the Great Pyramid was the undisputed tallest structure until the 1300s, another creation still deserves to be mentioned, the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Constructed in 250 BC, it was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. At somewhere between 390 and 450 feet, it was the tallest structure that wasn't a pyramid ever constructed up to that point. Keep in mind, at the time of its building, the pyramid had already held its record for over 2,000 years. But all good things must come to an end, and the Great Pyramid's 4 millennia reign ended with the completion of Lincoln Cathedral in 1311. The central spiral of the cathedral reached 512 feet. As with many grand cathedrals built from the medieval age onwards, the architecture was to be more magnificent than any before. These were literally monuments to Christendom, laced with intricate statues, work of art, and using the brightest minds in Europe at the time with the knowledge of architecture and geometry to construct these lasting structures. So cathedrals often took not decades, but centuries to be completed. The task was passed down from generation to generation. You could live and die without seeing a church be finished, maybe not even halfway or a quarter completed. Lincoln Cathedral's construction began in 1185 and was not completed until 126 years later in 1311. The span of time that it took to build this church is the equivalent of time from the massacre of Wounded Knee until today. In 1549, a strong windstorm destroyed the tallest spire, and it was never returned to its full height. To this day, the cathedral's key spire is gone. Rest in peace. After the destruction of the spire, St. Mary's Church in Stralsund became the world's tallest structure at 495 feet. Classic Germany, always benefiting from British destruction. This Gothic church held the record to 1647, when its tallest tower was struck and destroyed by lightning. The church still stands today, albeit at 150 feet shorter. Each prominent monarch wished to leave a lasting legacy by constructing a monument to Christ, bigger and better than before. Yet few of the future churches would ever reach the height of the old spire of Lincoln Cathedral. After St. Mary's Church was struck by lightning, 466-foot Strasbourg Cathedral in France held the record in 1647, and it held this record for 240 years, until the completion of the Church of St. Nicholas in Hamburg, Germany in 1874. Fun fact, this church was destroyed in the bombings of Hamburg in World War II. Wait, that's not very fun. That's not very fun at all. This church stood at 482 feet before being outstaged just 2 years later by Rouen Cathedral in Normandy. It matched the height of St. Mary's Church from over 240 years before. This cathedral took over 700 years to complete. It held the title for only 4 years before being overtaken by the Cologne Cathedral in Germany. This reached 515 feet. Again, the result of a lengthy construction. This took 600 years to build. But it wasn't a continuous stream of workers and generations of families devoting their entire lives. As was life, troubles happened, and there was always quite a bit of downtime for a few centuries or so. It's still a long time nonetheless, almost mind-boggling to our modern eyes. Cologne's cathedral wasn't overtaken by another church. It was overtaken by the Washington Monument in 1888, which stood at 554 feet. America's way of saying, "Look out, Pope, we got a bigger structure. We got our own Martin Luther, and his name is Uncle Sam." Created to honor the first US president, this Egyptian-style obelisk faced the good old tradition of Washington gridlock, taking several decades of construction due to funding issues and the whole killing each other bit. You can even see this split of construction on the monument itself. From here on out, records would be broken by the New World. Philadelphia City Hall officially became the tallest habitable building ever constructed, almost like a skyscraper of the time. It held this tallest habitable building record until 1908, when a string of skyscrapers popped up in America's biggest city, because industrialization. The Industrial Revolution transformed how people constructed, used, and perceived new buildings. Heights that used to require centuries of time and intricate design to keep the building from falling, those flying buttresses were not just for decoration, could now be achieved by iron and steel. Buildings no longer were as monumental and could be constructed at ease by comparison. The Singer Building was the first in a new line of buildings, corporation skyscrapers. The new tallest buildings from here until modern day would be the center of finance and business. This particular gem was 612 feet when it was constructed in 1908. It held the tallest building in the world record for about a year, and then it just fell into obscurity. The once tallest building in the world was demolished just 60 years later. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Company Tower, long name I know, reached the 700-foot mark when it was built in 1909. It held the world record for 4 years when it was beat by the Woolworth Building at 792 feet. When calculated for inflation, it cost the equivalent of $3 billion. The Bank of Manhattan Trust Building in 1930 reached 927 feet. This building greatly exceeded all others, a glorious new innovation in architecture, one that will truly bask in the superiority of its height, and the Chrysler Building surpassed it just a month later. Both buildings were intended on being the world's tallest, and the Chrysler Building's height was kept a secret. The Chrysler Building would add a secret spire that made it 100 feet taller than its competitor. In a time frame that used to take centuries, the tallest building at that time only took a year. But the story does not end here. In part 2, yes I know there's going to be 2 parts, we'll continue throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, and maybe even into the realm of the future, and what some of the proposed structures could look like. This is Cody of Geography Hub.